Welcome to the podcast, Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. I'm your host, Mike Allen. Imagine jumping out of a plane that's 13,000 feet in the air and then using a parachute to glide safely back to Earth. Well, it turns out that people pay a lot of money for that experience, but the first time they ever had the opportunity in the United States to pay to jump out of a plane was at a grass strip airport in Litchfield County, Connecticut. Well, here to tell us about it is Russ Wheeler. Not only was Russ there when the operation, so to speak, took off, but he's done hundreds of jumps himself, including one you're just not going to believe. In fact, we think he's the only person who's ever done it. Now, Russ has worn many hats in the day. He used to be the state pilot for Connecticut, ferrying the governor and his top staff to distant meetings by airplane. Russ is going to be along in a moment with today's episode. This week's trivia question: this festival has been around for 75 years, and it's the only one in Connecticut that honors this major figure from the state's largest city. What is it? Stick around after the main program for the answer, because then you're going to know the topic for next week's show. Today, an awe-inspiring episode with a man who, quite frankly, threw me a big curve in the midst of our interview. Now, I'd known going into the interview that Russ Wheeler knew all about the startup of commercial skydiving in the U.S. at Good Hill Airport in Roxbury because, well, he was there. What I was shocked to learn with just a basic little question was how many times he himself had jumped over the years, and quite frankly, the unbelievable locations where he has landed. Just wait until you hear that part. Russ kicks off our discussion with the circumstances leading to the first commercial skydiving location being based at a grass landing strip in rural Litchfield County.
One of the fellows that was in on the early part of this was Sebastian Pond, and he flew mail between Boston and New York in the old airplanes, and one of them quit at one time when it was fairly close to the field up there, and he landed in that field. And he liked it so much up there that later on he bought the farm, and they had cows and they did farming and everything, but he had the strip where we now operate out of. I think that was in the early 50s. He's had an airplane up there virtually ever since. He flew in World War II, but he flew airmail before that, and that's how they found the field and actually put an airfield in there. But there were no restrictions on that sort of stuff back then. He had an airplane, and he landed there.
So let's get back to this. This guy from France, Jacques Estelle, it's like the 1950s. He's almost 30 years old. He's been parachuting in France, and he brings this over now to the United States. And he ends up hooking up with a guy, Lou Sanborn.
Jacques Estelle thought that people would like to jump out of airplanes, so he was going to do this sort of stuff, and he's teamed up with Lou Sanborn, and he sent out flyers to lots of places, and Yale was one that picked up on it very aggressively, and a lot of the Yale students wanted to jump out of airplanes. So they came up there, and they got what would be a minimum instruction. The parachute was operated by a ripcord tied to the airplane, a static line. The parachute itself had to open, and the only thing you had to do was drift with the wind. There was very limited forward speed to any parachute or anything else. So wherever you opened, you drifted with the wind back to hopefully where you wanted to land.
Now, do I have it right that in those early days, the parachute was not what you call today steerable?
It was kind of steerable, but it didn't make any difference. No matter if you were pointed north, south, east, or west, it was going to do what it wanted to do. And the primary thing that it was to do at that point was to let your body down safely, and it did. But it was not landing any place in special. They just checked on the wind and hoped that they picked the right spot in the air to get out to drift back onto the field.
Now, I've been in a hot air balloon, and to me, the fascinating part about that was that up there, you don't feel the wind because you're moving with the wind. Is that the same sensation you get when you're skydiving?
Well, you certainly could feel the wind when the parachute is closed, when you're just free falling through space. But once the parachute is open, now you feel a little more because you've got forward speed. So it's like driving a convertible car at 15 miles an hour or something. You've got wind.
Now, I heard that one of the things Jacques brought over with him from France was a device called the sleeve. And what I've heard about the sleeve was that it was a device that took the experience of the chute opening from very, very painful to very uncomfortable. Would you agree with that?
The sleeve is designed so it slides down over the canopy. And as you go out into the air, this canopy is all in a sleeve, similar to a shirt sleeve or this sort of thing. And it is pulled off the canopy, so the canopy opens slowly. As it comes off, the bottom starts to open, and then it gets to the middle, and then the top opens when it disappears, when the sleeve comes off of it. So yes, it slows the opening shock up so you don't get a violent stop. Before that, you could get a stop at falling from, say, 125 miles an hour to 14 miles an hour in about a second and a half.
Explain to me, who is this guy, Lou?
Lou Sanborn was a military parachutist. He fought in combat, and he was out of the service at the time and was very interested in skydiving and jumping.
So now, here they are, they're coming together, and they want to open up a training school, and they want to start what will eventually become a skydiving hobby or a sport in the United States, which didn't exist at that time. And in fact, Roxbury and Good Hill Airport are called the birthplace of skydiving in America.
Well, these two people got together, and they talked about doing a skydiving operation as a commercial venture. And at first it started out like just on the weekend, and that's all that they did. But Jacques Cousteau had visions of doing what we're doing today. It was enjoyable, and it was the first time that you're totally free.
Now, they have to have something called a drop zone. Tell me what a drop zone is. How do you define it?
Just a place to land.
And this was the first one was here, right?
Yes, and they used it as the field where the hangar is. That was the drop zone, which was clear of trees, brush, everything.
So you're flying along with an airplane that's going probably, 100, 125 miles an hour. You jump out of that, you have a forward speed because you were in the airplane, so you're going forward. And so you have to sort of guess or figure or calculate where you're going to land, obviously, before you jump out of the airplane. How's that done?
Well, at first it was guessing by gosh. But then they figured out that they needed something that would fall at the same rate as an individual that weighs approximately 200 pounds. The parachutist at 200 pounds rates at a specific feet per minute coming down. So now they make what they called a streamer. They used a piece of crepe paper, 21 inches wide. It weighed 5.5 grams and was 21 feet long. And it was taped together, 3 sections. It had a bottom weight on it that was where the weight was. The rest of the crepe paper was just crepe paper. And as you come over where you want to land, and you throw that thing out of the airplane, and it sinks at the same rate as a person hanging in a parachute. So if it lands 200 meters downwind from where you want to land, when you get ready to jump, you go 200 meters upwind. And in theory, it all works very well.
Now, in those early days, tell me about your personal involvement.
Well, I was working on the farm when these people that I saw were talking and doing, and their first tests of parachuting, sport parachuting, and these two fellows, Lou Sanborn and Jacques Cousteau, came up and talked about it and wanted to jump there, and they made a couple of jumps there, and everything was in pretty good shape. So then Estelle went to different colleges and said, here's a great new sport, try it, it'll cost you so much money. You walk up there in a shirt sleeve that you're in, and everything is provided for you, and you walk off the drop zone after the parachute is opened. So it worked. And a lot of people decided, a lot, at that time it could have been 10, it would be a lot more than was there at the time. Yeah, it grew very quickly into a recreational sport.
Now, when this first started, you had the static line, as you call it, and that basically is attached to the plane. So when you jump out, it's going to open the parachute for you. And then they went to a manual system which says you're jumping out of the plane without a static line and you're going to open up a ripcord and open it yourself.
Once you're approved for manual operation by a number of things that you have to do, then you can jump out and do what is essentially a jump and pull. You can get to the point where you can jump out at great heights and watch the altimeter. By the time you're going to great heights, you also have a stopwatch that tells you the seconds from the airplane, and you know how far you're going per second, and you cross-check with the altimeter to make sure that at 5,000 feet, you have now spent 20 seconds falling free fall.
So you're not just floating through air having a great time, you're having to watch a lot of dials.
No, because it's like you can close your eyes and hold your breath for 20 seconds. But then you're going to open your eyes and say, yep, it's time to breathe, and pull the ripcord. You can do basically the same because you have a tendency to know how far you're falling and how many seconds you have been falling. So yeah, for 15 seconds on a 20-second delay, you can be out there doing acrobatics. You can do forward flips, backward flips, go over the side and come around. You can stand straight up or you can stand straight down. But, you're stopping your body from 125 miles an hour to 15 miles an hour in 3 seconds. The first second, the pack opens. The second, the parachute comes out in a long stream. Third second, it opens, so you stop. But being a free body, it's not like being thrown off of something and, landing at that kind of speed. You're in free air.
Did you ever jump yourself?
I've jumped into New York City, one of the few that's ever done it. I've done air shows in Long Island. I've done skydiving all over this part of the country.
Okay, you got me. Tell me about jumping into New York City.
If any of the police or anything else ever asked me, I never did it. But I was asked by the World's Fair at that time, that was down there, if I could jump into Central Park. If I could do that with a sign that said, World's Fair is at whatever. And of course, to get permission to do that, right away they say, oh no, you're going to kill yourself, you can't do. So it's, like one said, it's always better to just do it and beg forgiveness than it is to try and get permission. So we figured it out, and we flew down the Hudson River and turned at 42nd Street and came whistling in between the buildings, climbed up between them, and I stepped out with this big sign and landed right in Central Park, where I got picked up by a car that knew I was going to do this sort of stuff and got the hell out of Dodge before any of the police or anything else got to us. And we did things like that. We've jumped into Boston Common. We've jumped into one of the ball fields in Philadelphia. We've jumped into all kinds of places everywhere. We do air shows all over everything.
How many jumps have you made? Several hundred?
Oh, yes. Yeah, beyond that, by quite a bit.
No, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Central Park was probably your craziest one.
There's others. There's others.
So can you mention a couple of the crazier ones you've done?
In early skydiving, the military was dead set against this. You don't do this sort of stuff. This is stupid. But they called us and asked us to do a sport jump down in New Jersey. And we said, sure, no problem. So the day of the event, we went up and jumped out of the airplane and landed right where we were supposed to, and the whole bit packed up right quick. And they wanted another jump towards sunset. So we said, sure, not a problem. And I rode a bicycle out of the back of the airplane. And in free fall, they have pictures of me pedaling the bicycle and everything going, falling, going like mad. And it was a military exhibition. And of course, before I opened, I kicked the bicycle away, and then I opened the parachute, and the bike went down and crashed. And this guy with all kinds of stuff all over him, all kinds of metal type stuff, came up, and he's about this far off my nose, and he's screaming and hollering at me. All the other skydivers are laughing, they're rolling on the ground, knowing what and how it worked. And he's screaming, And I looked over at one of the guys and I said, you know, this guy thinks I care. And I said, and fella, you may be the head of the Air Force, but I don't care. You hired me to come here. This is what you get. He's still screaming. And finally I turned to one other guy and I said, you think you're hearing him scream now? Wait until he finds out I stole that from the officers club last night. And, you know, that sort of stuff was done all the time. There was a lot of that. And we did do a lot that was good. We demonstrated that you could put 150 people in a relatively small area at night with nobody knowing it. You have an airplane that flies over at 13 or 15,000 feet. It's pretty quiet. And it just flies over, and it's gone. And all of a sudden, you got 150 fighting force down below you. So there were benefits to what we did, and we had a lot of fun doing it.
Russ says the military was always in touch about the skydiving school's experiments and accomplishments. The Connecticut operation of charging people to jump out of an airplane eventually moved to Massachusetts to the Orange Municipal Airport. It remains there to this very day. Now, back in 1959, when the operation began, it cost $30 to take a jump, and that was actually a lot of money back then. Well, today it starts at around $300. Now, by the time the operation moved, Russ was a credentialed jumper in every single grade class. Now, he would go on to pilot the plane that took Connecticut's governor and other cabinet-level personnel to meetings at distant locations. That was done through the Department of Transportation, of course. In the meantime, Russ owns that original Cessna plane that was used in those very first jumps back in the 1950s. But he himself does not jump anymore. He says the expert pilots who knew exactly how to maneuver that plane for him, well, they've all died off. Well, that wraps up this episode of Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. One other fun fact about Russ, he was the first person to parachute into the Yale Bowl in New Haven. I want to thank our guest for today's program, Russ Wheeler, longtime skydiving specialist and one of the pioneers of the sport in the United States. The answer to this week's trivia question, the question was, this festival's been around for 75 years, and it's the only one in Connecticut that honors this major figure from the state's largest city. What is it? And the answer is the Barnum Festival, a major event in the state's largest city, the Park City of Bridgeport. And next week on Amazing Tales CT, we're going to be talking to the 2025 ringmaster for the festival, the man on whose shoulders the effort rests to pull together this incredible undertaking, honoring the world's greatest showman, P.T. Barnum. Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path is a production of True North Associates, LLC. This is Mike Allen. Be safe, and please stay healthy.